But Lac Lam Vien just quietly shook his head, refusing to eat, and he didn't want to say anything more. Lam Thu had to say the doctor said that with Lac Lam Vien's current condition, he definitely couldn't continue his studies. At least he needed to rest for 3 months to half a year. Lac Din's idea was to wait until Lac Lam Vien got a little better, then immediately send him abroad to study. Lac Lam Vien shook his head, weakly saying he didn't want to go abroad. Lam Thu threw a candy into the trash can, coldly saying she wasn't discussing this with him, when she saw Lac Lam Vien's eyelashes visibly tremble. At the moment the candy hit the bottom of the trash can, she suddenly remembered the doctor's advice to absolutely avoid making him too emotional. She unconsciously worried that she had made this decision too soon. She sighed, saying this didn't need to be rushed. First, let him recover well. If there's anything uncomfortable, remember to tell the nurse. This illness needs careful attention. But Lac Lam Vien seemed to hear nothing. His hand was on his chest. His heart hurt a lot. He felt like he wouldn't recover. Dr. Ngo set up a small dining table by the bed, bringing hot porridge to his mouth. Suddenly, Lac Lam Vien asked why there was candy by his bed, eating small by the bed, bringing hot porridge to his lips. Suddenly, Lac Lam Vien asked why there was candy by the bed. Dr. Ngo's gaze briefly dodged, refusing to say. Lac Lam Vien sensed something was off. Even the doctor wouldn't tell him the truth. Why was he pretending not to breathe, looking so agitated that Dr. Ngo was scared to the point he couldn't handle it? With him, why pretend to be unable to breathe, looking all dramatic? Uncle Ngo was so scared he couldn't handle it. He had to admit that Duhan had given him this candy. A few days ago, he asked me to deliver it to you personally. At that time, I had just returned home from shopping and saw him standing outside the door, covered in injuries. It was because the boss sent someone to beat him. I just got home from shopping when I saw him standing outside the door, covered in injuries. It was because the boss sent someone to beat him up. His limbs were also injured. Moving slowly, he just handed me this box of candy and left immediately. However, Dr. Ngo didn't mention Duhan's miserable condition. He was afraid the young master would argue with the old master, only saying in the box, in the miserable state of Duhan, he was afraid the young master would argue with the old man again, just saying in the box. There was only one candy. Nothing else. Young master, I'm not lying to you, there really is just candy. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the young master suddenly spring up from the bed, trying to get down. Dr. Ngo hurriedly ran over to support him, saying, don't move. If you want to find something, let me look for it. Lac Lam Vien's face was pale, only staring intently at the trash can. Hot tears. Lac Lam Vien's face turned pale, only staring at the trash can. Hot tears welling up in a rush. Were rushing out, both urgent and choked. When Dr. Ngo came to look, he saw there was no candy left in the trash can. The garbage bag had been replaced cleanly. Nothing remained. Lac Lam Vien suddenly remembered that the cleaning staff had just passed by, leaving nothing for him. Had been newly cleaned. Spotless. Nothing left. Lac Lam Vien suddenly remembered that the cleaning staff just... Inside him, it felt like a storm was brewing. His vision darkened, memories flashing before his eyes. He remembered telling Duhan before that if there was ever a time he was upset, all he needed was for him to give him a candy. He would definitely stop being mad. And now that candy, before his eyes, everything went dark, memories flashing back. He remembered telling Duhan before that if there was a time he was lost because of his carelessness, never to be found again. Dr. Ngo worriedly asked, should I go to the supermarket to buy you some candy? Lac Lam Vien covered his face with his hand, shaking his head, saying no, it wouldn't matter anymore. Between them, it wasn't just one candy that could solve things. Once he chose to let go, he shouldn't cling to those good things anymore. Lac Lam Vien's recovery time was very long. He quietly spoke less, only asking, accidentally lost him, he would never find him again. Uncle Na worriedly asked, should I go to the supermarket and buy you some candy? Lac Lam Vien covered his face with his hand, shaking his head. No need, it wouldn't work anymore. Between us, a single piece of candy couldn't solve anything. Once you choose to let go, you shouldn't cling to those good things anymore. Lac Lam Vien's recovery time was long. He quietly spoke less, only asking, I miss these good things so much. The recovery time for Lac Lam Vien is super long. He's quiet and reserved, just asking for a drawing notebook. On nice days, he would go down to the yard to draw. One evening, Lam Thu flipped through the notebook and discovered it wasn't drawing landscapes at all. All the pages were shadows of a boy. She turned to look at her son lying on the bed, not knowing. To draw the scenery, all were shadows of the same boy. She turned to look at her son lying on the bed, not knowing what he was dreaming about, suddenly smiling for a moment, then the next second tears were streaming down again. Just a little while after him, opened his eyes. In his eyes was a shattered sky full of stars. both heartbreaking and bewildered. Lac Lam Vien blinked slowly before finally seeing clearly in front of him. It was Lam Thu receiving him. This was the reality. Lam Thu brought the phone to him, the phone that had been repaired, but Lac Lam Vien didn't dare to turn it on. He stuffed it straight into the drawer, lacking the courage to look at it. The weather was getting colder outside the window, and it was rare to see snow falling. Uncle noticed that Lac Lam Vien was a bit picky about food, so he was overjoyed. When he said he wanted to eat cake, Uncle Nu immediately agreed to go buy it for him. But when he brought it in, he saw Lac Lam Vien sticking 19 candles into the cake. Lac Lam Vien told Uncle Ngo to turn off the lights. Then, sitting alone in front of the flickering candlelight, he closed his eyes and prayed for a long time. After that, he blew out the candles. When the lights turned back on, he had lost all appetite, just standing by the window, lost in thought for a long time before he finally dialed that number. The familiar male voice on the other end made Lac Lam Vien's eyes well up with tears. He clutched his aching chest, not saying a word. The person on the other end was silent too, but neither of them hung up. The birthday wish got stuck in his throat, unable to come out. Not long after, the phone emitted a long beep, and then fell completely silent. Duhan had ended the call. Lac Lam Vien's trembling hand lowered the phone, almost unable to see the screen anymore. He had lost his candy, and from now on, he would have no more candy. At the same time, Duhan put away his phone and returned to the hospital room. His grandmother's spirit was declining day by day. This winter was truly too difficult. He took out a book and sat under the light to study for a while, but his heart remained restless. Suddenly, his grandmother woke up and softly called his name. Duhan hurried over, grasping her rough but warm hand. She opened her eyes, smiled, and said to him, "My dear grandson, happy birthday. Let me make you a bowl of. It's tough this winter, like really tough." He took out a book and sat under the study lamp for a bit, but his heart was still restless. Suddenly, his grandma woke up and softly called his name. Duhan hurried over, grabbing her rough but warm hand. She opened her eyes, smiled, and said to him, "My good boy, happy birthday. Let me make you a bowl." Laughing and saying to him, "My good boy, happy birthday. Let me make you a bowl of longevity noodles. Live a long life, and be healthy every year." Duhan bowed his head, pressing his forehead against her warm hand, thanking his grandmother. Having her was enough. He once thought that having his grandmother was enough, and even if he wanted other things very much, he could endure and not need them anymore. But he didn't know that was the last call he would receive from Lac Lam Vien. After that, Lac Lam Vien, he could hold back, didn't need it anymore. But little did he know, that was the last call he would get from Lac Lam Vien. After that, Lac Lam Vien transferred schools, and no one knew where he had gone, leaving no trace or any news behind. Countless times in his dreams, Duhan always dreamed of that moment. In his dreams, he asked Lac Lam Vien what he wanted to say to him, but in the dream, Lac Lam Vien remained forever silent, saying nothing at all. The wanted to say something to him, but in his dreams, Lac Lam Vien was forever silent, saying nothing at all. Last thing he wanted to say to Duhan, he would never hear again. 7 years ago, it was the princess, who broke up for Duhan's future, forcing herself to be hospitalized, while Duhan remained completely unaware. He stood in front of her house for days and nights until Lac Ding sent someone to chase him away, and only then did he leave in despair. 7 years later, would they still have a chance to piece things back together? Duhan lay on his bed preparing to get up. After being chased away, he finally left feeling disheartened. 7 years later, would they still have a chance to mend their broken relationship? Duhan turned on his bed, preparing to get up. He was originally a self-disciplined person, never lazy enough to linger. He pushed open the light yellow door. Inside the room, the blackout curtains blocked all sunlight, but above the bed, a small star-shaped lamp was turned on, spinning and casting countless stars onto the ceiling. On the children's bed, a little boy lay there, hugging a big tabby cat. The boy was awakened and rubbed his eyes, with sleepy eyes still innocent. "Daddy." Du Uyen pulled the small blanket up to cover his belly so he could sleep a bit longer. "Come on, that little kid's name is Du Uyen. His obediently cute face just doesn't look much like Duhan." Du Uyen was led to the small dining table by the maid, hugging a bottle of milk and starting to drink. Duhan looked at the boy, his eyes still squinting from sleep, saying, "You're already 3 years old. It's time to stop drinking milk." Hearing Daddy was going to cut off his milk supply, Du Uyen's dreamy eyes immediately widened. He hugged the milk bottle tightly, glaring at Duhan. "No way," Duhan negotiated. If he didn't stop drinking milk, he would have to go to art class. Du Uyen pouted his small mouth, feeling wronged, saying that if he went to art class, he wouldn't be able to play with Sister Tran anymore. Sister Tran wouldn't have time to play with a kid who hasn't stopped drinking milk like him. Du Uyen immediately put on a serious old man face and replied, "Daddy, you don't understand. Sister Tran likes me. She's only 5 years older than me. I think this is fine." Du-han laughed. "No breakfast for you. Hurry up. Later Daddy will take you out with the phone in hand." He pulled up documents on children's art centers collected by his assistant. There were several places that were quite reputable. In City C, based on Du-han's usual personality, he would prioritize choosing places with long experience, but this time a center that had just opened less than a year caught his eye because it was called the Fish Painting Garden. It sounded very fitting for his son's name. Indeed, when he read the names of several places to Du Uyen, the little boy immediately shouted, "I want to go to my place, mine." Du-han teased, truly arrogant, but in his heart, he decided to first take him there to see. That day, the center was organizing activities on stage, with mascots dancing around, all balloons, and children. Du Uyen faced the crowd without fear. As soon as he let go of Daddy's hand, his short legs ran straight into the play area, just like a husky that had slipped off its leash. Du-han couldn't leave, so he stood nearby watching over him. Meanwhile, Luo Lin Yuan was dressed in a rabbit mascot costume, quietly watching him from behind. He didn't expect to run into Du-han here, outside in the hot July weather. He wore a shirt already dotted with sweat, internally scolding that silly kid. Suddenly he felt a poke on his back. He turned around to face a huge rabbit head, almost jumping in surprise. Although shocked, he still kept a calm expression. The rabbit waved at him, signaling him to come inside and sit. For some reason, this staff member wouldn't speak, only using exaggerated body movements to express. Du-han understood everything. He smiled and politely declined. "No thanks, my child is playing." He got poked. He turned around to face a giant rabbit head, almost jumping out of his skin. Though shocked, he kept a calm expression. The rabbit waved at him, signaling him to come inside. For some reason, this staff member just wouldn't. He still kept calm. The bunny raised a hand to greet him, signaling him to come inside and sit. For some reason, this staff member wouldn't. "Over there, I have to watch him." The rabbit suddenly seemed frozen, standing still for a long time, until a child ran. "Stay there, I have to keep an eye on it." The rabbit suddenly froze, standing still for a long time until a child ran. Into its arms, giggling, it finally picked up the child and left. Du-han didn't pay much attention, thanks to the mascot costume. He wasn't afraid of being recognized, repeatedly trying to approach Du-han. When Du-han turned around, he still saw that rabbit. This time it was wearing an additional carrot-shaped bag. He paused for a moment, casually took it, thinking that this center, with an extra bag shaped like a carrot. He paused for a moment, casually taking it, thinking that this center really knows how to win over customers. The rabbit's hands wrapped in thick fur rummaged through the carrot bag for a long time. Du-han conveniently pulled off the rabbit's gloves, politely saying, "Sorry, I saw you wearing gloves and it looked inconvenient to get things, so I helped take them off." The rabbit waved its hand to signal it was fine, finally pulling out what it wanted, a neatly placed milk candy in the palm of its hand offered to Du-han. Unfortunately, the man in front of the rabbit accepted all the previous gifts, but when it came to the milk candy, was fine. The rabbit waved his hand, signaling it was okay, finally pulling out what he wanted, a neatly placed milk candy in his palm, offering it to Du-han. Unfortunately, the man in front of the rabbit accepted all the previous gifts, but not the milk candy. Du-han's face. Unfortunately, the man in front of the bunny accepted all the previous gifts, but not the milk candy, then outright refused, saying, "I can't handle lactose." Sorry, the bunny got rejected, like a total bummer. The look of loss. I don't get why Du-han could see the disappointment in that stuffed animal's face. It felt like right. Even its long ears were about to droop. The bunny put the candy back in its pocket and went under a tree to start inflating the stuffed bunny balloons, twisting the long balloons into all sorts of shapes to give to the kids with umbrellas and fans. In Du-han's hands, it really felt much better, but he briefly thought in this scorching heat, I wonder if the bunny in that thick costume is going to suffer from heat, stroke or something. That thought just flashed by when he saw the bunny finishing up a balloon flower, standing up and wobbling towards him, almost falling over. Du-han immediately stepped up to support the bunny's arm. "Are you okay? Or should we go inside and rest for a bit?" "Let's go." The bunny nodded slightly, handing the flower to him and pointing towards the inside. Du-han hesitated, glancing back at Du Uyen. The bunny seemed to sense his awkwardness, pushed his hand away, shook his head, and pointed towards the playground, signaling him to keep an eye on the kid. After that, the bunny's figure staggered away, looking so lonely. Du-han watched until that figure disappeared before turning back to find Du Uyen. The little rascal was playing under the hot sun, face all flushed, dripping with sweat. Du-han said, "Dude, your shirt is soaked. If you get a fever tonight, Don't come crying for dad. Du Uyen wasn't happy that Duhan spoke first. The little sister Ben puffed her neck to argue, saying when she had a fever, wasn't it dad who hugged her while she cried, calling her Uyen Uyen? So embarrassing. Duhan felt a bit humiliated by the little rascal in front of the crowd. But he wasn't mad, just softened his tone, saying, when you go to art class, there will be lots of kids to play with you. Duyen hesitated between her sister's legs and then looked at the group of kids, hesitating for a moment, but ultimately chose the group of kids. After all, she only has one sister, but there are so many big sisters here. Duhan finally found a teacher who wasn't in a mascot costume, explaining his intentions. The teacher was very enthusiastic. The little friend hesitated for a moment, ultimately choosing the group of little friends. After all, there was only one sister, but here, there were so many big sisters. Duhan hugged his son tightly, taking the father and son around to visit, and then said, Du, your son is still young, usually needs a parent to accompany him during class. So, you should discuss with your wife and choose someone to study with him, okay? Duhan replied, she's not around anymore. The teacher led them to meet the principal to complete the enrollment procedures. Stepping into the office, he immediately saw a guy with his back turned, wearing a soaked white tank top, sitting in front of a fan, said his mom was no longer around. The teacher led them to meet the principal to complete the enrollment procedures. Entering the office, half of his lower body still in the bunny mascot outfit, sweat soaking through his shirt, revealing a vague tattoo on his back. Seeing that scene, Duhan froze, standing right at the doorway. Squinting his eyes to focus on the principal, that guy was holding a cold can of Coca-Cola. He leaned half of his body, still wearing the rabbit mascot costume, sweat soaking his shirt, revealing a vague tattoo on his back. Seeing the scene, slowly turning his head, from his ear to his strong jawline, his long eyelashes drenched. Cold in his hand, he slowly turned around, from his ear to his strong jawline, his long eyelashes soaked. Those deep eyes. He looked like he just stepped out of Duhan's dreams, and now he was right here in reality. Lac Lam Vien blinked slowly, finally looking up at the person standing in the doorway. He didn't dare. Lac Lam Vien blinked slowly, finally looking up at the person standing at the door. He didn't dare say a word. Teacher Teo Hum seemed to sense something strange in the atmosphere of the room, but the one standing behind, Duhan, spoke up first. His voice was much lower than before. It's really been a long time since I saw Principal Lac. The two looked at each other, their gazes locking, for a long time, but in the end, it was Lac Lam Vien who looked away, lowering his eyelashes, biting his lip. That's right. It's been so long since we last met, like 7 years, and little Hung feels something's off, so he says to Ngai, did you mistake me for someone else, sir? Our director doesn't have that surname I didn't get to. Before she could finish, Lac Lam Vien interrupted, telling her to pour a glass of water for Ngai Du first, while he goes to change clothes. Little Hung quickly replied, got it, and then saw Lac Lam Vien bouncing out of the director's office in his bunny outfit. Anyone who didn't know would think he was running away from a date, not changing clothes. Standing there feeling tired, Duhan found a chair to sit in, resting his arms and swinging his little legs. Dad, I love this place. Duhan didn't pay attention to him, just focused on the office door, lost in thought. Lac Lam Vien hid in the bathroom, his mind in a complete mess, wanting to stay in there forever, yet also wanting to rush out in front of Duhan. He basically didn't dare to face his gaze. God knows how he felt when he saw Duhan through the bunny headpiece among the colorful balloons. He thought it was just a fleeting dream that would vanish with a touch. He stared at Duhan for a long time, taking in his more mature face, sharper features, and a body that seemed even more toned than back in school. He wore a shirt, broad shoulders, a slim waist, solid chest and bone structure. Wait. Lac Lam Vien, soaking in the water, shook his head vigorously, slapping himself twice, telling himself to stop thinking. What was he daydreaming about in broad daylight? Besides, Duhan probably has a kid by now. He must be married, right? Lac Lam Vien splashed hot water on his face, the heat even stinging his eyes. Poor little Hung was entertaining guests in the office, almost spilling all the words he had inside, but this Mr. Du was still cold and scary. When she noticed Duhan glancing out the door for the 10th time, even checking his watch, little Hung was sweating like crazy. Duhan asked her again, why did you say I mistook someone? Before she could respond, the office door swung open. A sweet scent of body wash wafted in. Just when little Hung sighed in relief, seeing Lac Lam Vien, her heart sank. Didn't they say to dress a bit more mature when meeting parents? The director was dressed like a high school student. Just then, Duhan suddenly stood up, slammed the tissue box down on the coffee table, and firmly told Lac Lam Vien, wipe it. Lac Lam Vien blushed awkwardly, and little Hung thought it must be too hot today. The director had been busy for a while, not in good shape, so she had to step in and use some of the usual lines the director used to comfort parents. talking about the environment, the teaching staff, collaborations with so many agencies, often organizing activities in the U.S. Very famous. While she struggled to advertise, Lac Lam Vien just sat beside, fiddling with his fingers, looking dazed. In reality, he was eavesdropping. He thought Duhan probably didn't want to be here anyway, since this place was opened by his ex. Maybe this was the last time they would meet. He wanted to hear a bit more of Duhan's voice, keep it in his heart, occasionally bringing it out to magnify. Duhan getting married was fine too. At least after leaving, he could still live a normal life. He felt a sting in his nose, the pressure in his hands heavier. Just then, a small hand reached out, softly holding his hand. Du Huyen, to the point of being scary. When she noticed Duhan glancing at the door for the 10th time, even checking his watch, little Hung was sweating like crazy. Duhan asked her why she said he mistook someone. Before she could answer, the office door of Tio Hung pouring out like rain. Duhan asked her again, why did she say I mistook the person? Before she could answer, the office door was pushed open. A sweet smell of body wash followed. Little Hung just breathed a sigh of relief, but when he saw Lac Lam Vien, his heart sank. Didn't they say that when meeting parents one should dress more appropriately? Lac Lam Vien's appearance, his heart sank. Didn't we say clearly that when meeting the parents, you had to dress a bit more mature? Slammed down on the coffee table, using a bit of force to say to Lac Lam Vien, wipe it. Lac Lam Vien blushed awkwardly. Tio Hung felt that it was probably too hot today. The director had been busy for a long time, not in a good state, so he had to step in and handle it. Using some of the usual words, the director, it's so hot today. The director has been busy for a while, not feeling well, so I had to step up and handle things, bringing up some usual words from the director, often used to comfort parents, talking about the environment, the teaching staff, collaborating with how many agencies, frequently organizing activities in the U.S. Very famous. While she was struggling to advertise, Lac Lam Vien just sat next to fiddling with his fingers, looking like he was in a daze. Actually, he was still eavesdropping. He thought Duhan probably didn't want to come here. After all, this place was opened by his ex. Maybe this was the last meeting. He wanted to hear a bit more of Duhan's voice, keeping it in his heart, occasionally bringing it out to magnify. Duhan getting married was fine too. At least after leaving, he could still live a normal life. He felt his nose tingle, the pressure in his hand getting heavier. At that moment, a small hand reached out, softly holding his hand. Du Huyen, a normal life. He felt a sting in his nose, the pressure in his hand was heavier. At that moment, a small hand reached out, softly holding his hand. Du Huyen, in a small voice, says it will hurt a lot, hugging Lac Lam Vien, suddenly pulls the boy into his arms, sits him on his lap, and asks if he wants some candy, peeling the candy and handing it over. Moving closer, Du Huyen gestures for the boy to open his mouth, while Duhan reminds the little one that, at this age, he shouldn't eat too many sweets. Feeling resentful, Duyen glares at his dad, who won't let him have any candy, while his hand is holding the candy from Lac Lam Vien, feeling extremely awkward, wondering if he can eat it or not. At this moment, Duhan, who was chatting with Tio Hung, suddenly stops. Leaning over, he naturally takes a piece of candy from Lac Lam Vien's hand and pops it into his mouth, completely unaware that he just said he couldn't eat sugar. Duyen feels it's unfair, he wants some too. Duhan replies, no. And Duyen pouts, why can dad eat? Duhan says, because it's all dad's. Duyen is about to faint, feeling like his dad is even more childish than him, and he's the one who's supposed to be the adult. The boy opens his big eyes, cutely demanding candy from Lac Lam Vien, who dares not give him any in front of the parents, tightly holding his candy bag and shaking his head awkwardly. Duyen pretends to cry, burying his chubby face in Lac Lam Vien's chest, rolling around. Brother, you smell so good. Duyen Han coldly interjects, Duyen, sit up straight, you're still a baby. While Lac Lam Vien gently lifts the boy a little and asks, what's your name? Duyen, he points randomly, not usually liking to recognize characters, but he knows his name, but can't articulate it clearly. Then Duhan says, the character Uyen in Uyen means the origin of the tuition fee. Tio Hung smugly looks at Lac Lam Vien, who looks shocked, saying, Alipay or WeChat. At this point, Lac Lam Vien finally realizes his work attitude isn't right, so he actively pulls out his phone to check, asking if he can transfer money via WeChat. Duhan glances at the phone in his hand, saying Alipay. Lac Lam Vien wants to add Duhan on WeChat, but gets rejected, so he quietly exits the app, feeling sour inside. He thinks, well, Duhan already has his own life and marriage, I shouldn't disturb him. Even though he comforts himself like that, His heart feels like it's being bitten by ants, painful and uncomfortable. So he decides to arrange for Du Yan to be in a class farthest from his office, thinking if he can't see him, it won't hurt anymore. After transferring the money, Du-han stands up, ready to leave, and Lac Lam Vien quickly waves goodbye. At the moment of parting, he finally gathers enough courage to look at him, and Du-han is also looking at him. Lac Lam Vien's deep gaze doesn't shy away anymore, staring straight into those eyes, softly saying goodbye. Not knowing which nerve Du-han's words touched, his brows immediately furrowed, his expression darkening, looking quite bad. Lac Lam Vien lightly bites his lip, feeling a bit annoying. After a long time apart, clearly Du-han took the initiative to greet him, yet he didn't respond at all, not saying a word from start to finish. Only when the other person was about to leave did he manage to squeeze out a goodbye. His indifferent attitude like that would definitely not make anyone happy if it were him. Du-han opens his mouth, saying, "The name Ngu Duyen of the painting garden was also set by the headquarters in America. Which character is Ngu? Which character is Duyen?" Hearing this, Duyen feels like he knows the answer, calling out, "Dad, it's the Ngu in Little Fish." When he entered here, he saw Tio Hung immediately interrupting. "It's not set by the American headquarters, it was personally set by our director. The person who should answer this question is Director Lack." "It was personally set by our director. The person who should answer this question is Director Lack. And yet, you can't say a word. Your whole face is flushed. The director is flustered." And Little Hung confusingly says, "Chen Cohen. Wait, Mr. Du, you haven't filled out the information form yet. The information form is for parents. Students need to fill in contact details, home address, all sorts of things. Earlier you just tried to add Du-han on WeChat, but he politely rejected you. Now being reminded about filling out the form makes you feel like you're trapped in a never-ending loop, right?" Du-han's lips curve slightly, a very subtle smile, and he gives a smile that carries a mysterious meaning. He suddenly sits down in Lac Lam Vien's spot and takes the pen from the other person. When handing over the pen, his finger accidentally brushes against Lac Lam Vien, and he immediately pulls his hand back hard. He even shrinks back, and the smile on Du-han's lips suddenly disappears. Lac Lam Vien wears a polite, fake smile to thank him. "Thank you for trusting our painting garden." Du-han ignores you, stands up, leaves the desk, and takes Du Uyen with him, walking straight out. He leaves the office without looking back. Lac Lam Vien hesitates, pacing around the office a few times, and ultimately succumbs to his stubbornness. He thinks he's just looking and not remembering, so he takes out the form and reads it from the beginning. By the end, he unexpectedly discovers that Du Uyen comes from a single-parent family without a mother, and the person filling in the parent section is actually Du-han. Is Du-han going to attend class? Du-han doesn't have a wife? Where is his wife? Did they divorce? Lac Lam Vien holds the form in his hand for a long time, spinning it around. He looks up and sees his own reflection on the computer screen, smiling. What's there to smile about? Isn't it just that Du-han doesn't have a wife? When he gets home at night, Lac Lam Vien receives an international call. Lam Thu isn't good at caring for others, and his way of asking is blunt, asking if he still has money. When Lac Lam Vien decided to return to his country to start a business, Lam Thu strongly opposed it. He followed his mother's request and finished studying fine arts abroad. When he graduated, Lam Thu wanted to bring him into his circle, and even introduced him to work at a gallery. But unexpectedly, after working at the gallery for 2 years, Lac Lam Vien suddenly wanted to return to his country to start a business, and moreover, to City C. Lam Thu didn't stop him anymore, because during his study abroad, in America, he almost got poisoned. Lam Thu regretted not taking good care of his son, and finally let him do what he wanted. Lac Lam Vien probably will never know that during the 7 years he disappeared, Du-han searched for him for so long, searching, to the point where he even doubted whether such a person really existed. If not, then why couldn't he find him? After Lac Lam Vien hung up, he hesitated for a moment, and finally copied Du-han's phone number from the form. As a result, he was surprised to find that Du-han seemed to still be using that number. Lac Lam Vien sighed softly, once again feeling lucky that he didn't drink that cup of wine back then, or else it would have been a different life. He wouldn't be able to return to his country, wouldn't be able to have his own career, and definitely wouldn't be able to meet Du-han again in the bar. The long-standing friendship between Du-han and Fung Tiu has been maintained for many years. Initially, he always sought him out to ask where Lac Lam Vien was. What's annoying is that Fung Tiu didn't know either, and the Lac family kept silent, only saying to the outside world that Lac Lam Vien went abroad for advanced studies year after year. Fung Tiu's mood for searching gradually faded. In a situation where Lac Lam Vien didn't contact anyone, so why can't I find him? After Lac Lam Vien hung up, he hesitated for a moment, but eventually wrote down Du-han's phone number from the form. To his surprise, he discovered that Du-han still seemed to be using that number. Lac Lam Vien sighed softly, feeling lucky again that he hadn't drunk that cup of wine back then, or else it would have been a whole different life. He wouldn't be able to return to the country, wouldn't have his own career, and definitely wouldn't meet Du-han again at the bar. The long-standing friendship between Du-han and Fung Tio had been maintained for many years. At first, he always reached out to ask where Lac Lam Vien was. The annoying part was that Fung Tio didn't know either, and the Lac family kept quiet, only saying to outsiders that Lac Lam Vien was studying abroad. Year after year, Fung Tio's desire to find him gradually faded. In the situation where Lac Lam Vien didn't contact him, his disappointment slowly turned into a lack of motivation. But he never forgot Lac Lam Vien, because this person in front of him would come, and there were plenty of memories, many stories to tell. Du-han listened while drinking, occasionally laughing at interesting things, but it was just a faint smile that quickly faded away. Fung Tio always remembered the year Lac Lam Vien left. Du-han got drunk, suddenly telling him that if it weren't for the fact that he could still mention him, sometimes he even felt like Lac Lam Vien never existed. He was just a beautiful dream that appeared during his hardest times, and when the time was up, the dream would vanish. Fung Tio comforted him. How could that be? He's a real person. How could he just disappear? We'll meet again someday, and when that happens, I'll definitely give him a beating. Dude, Du-han slumped onto the table, hiding his eyes. Yeah, we'll meet again, but when that time comes, what will it be like? But in the end, Du-han didn't continue. The next day, Lac Lam Vien held the phone, staring at the number, still too scared to call him, sighed. Originally planning to escape, but accidentally pressed the call button. Just when he was frantically trying to hang up, someone picked up on the other end. Du-han said, "Hello," and Lac Lam Vien carefully held the phone to his ear. "Hi." Hearing Du-han silent, Lac Lam Vien became even more nervous. "Quick-witted," he said. "I just called to ask if you're going to class this afternoon or evening. Are you going with Du Uyen?" Du-han replied, "I already called your school to confirm the class schedule." "Oh, sorry." Lac Lam Vien seemed to hear Du-han let out a breath on the phone. Then he asked, "Is there anything else?" Lac Lam Vien dejectedly said no, and apologized for wasting his time. The other end was silent for a long time. Then Du-han said, "Listening to your call isn't a waste of time. See you tonight." Lac Lam Vien immediately perked up and replied, "See you tonight." That evening, he felt a bit cold, so he specially wore a mask, afraid of spreading anything to the kids. As soon as he stepped out, he bumped into Du-han, who was taking Du Uyen to class. Du-han had just finished work, wearing a shirt, rolling up his sleeves because of the weather, revealing his strong arms, and wearing a tie. His appearance today was even more different than yesterday. Lac Lam Vien held a coffee bag, his throat dry from the tempting sight, his knees shaking. Du-han just glanced at him, then lowered his head gently to guide Du Uyen inside, looking for a seat himself. Du Uyen looked up. Tonight, Lac Lam Vien immediately perked up and replied, "See you tonight." He was a bit cold tonight, so he specially wore a mask, afraid of spreading it to the kids. Just as he stepped out the door, he bumped into Du-han, who was taking Du Uyen to class. Du-han had just finished work, wearing a shirt, the cuffs rolled up due to the weather, revealing his strong arms, and wearing a tie. His appearance today was even more different than yesterday. Lac Lam Vien held a coffee bag, his throat dry from the tempting scene in front of him, his knees shaking. Du-han just glanced at him, once, then lowered his head gently, pushing Du Uyen inside, going to find a seat by himself. Du Uyen looked up. "Looking at my dad," I sighed in frustration. "What's the point of having a dad like that? I have to handle everything myself." Worried, Du-han stepped closer. Lac Lam Vien's shadow stretched out, completely covering him. The heels of his shoes clicked on the tiled floor, each step slow yet steady, like he was sure of his victory. Lac Lam Vien had no way to escape. He held his breath, his eyes peeking out from behind his mask, wide open with a desire he didn't even realize he had. Du-han seemed oblivious to his gaze, stopping a few steps away, politely saying, "Good evening, Principal Lac." Lac Lam Vien huffed softly, pressing his mask down, replying, "Good evening." "Mr. Du." Du-han stared intently at the mask on his face, feeling uncomfortable. "Why?" Lac Lam Vien nodded, wishing him a good evening. Lac Lam Vien huffed lightly, pressing his hand on his mask, replying, "Good evening." Du-han stared at the mask on his face, feeling uncomfortable. "Why is Lam Vien nodding? My head's a bit cold, but don't worry, I usually just stay in the office handling work, so I won't be going out casually." "Of course, I'm not worried. I won't spread it to the kids. I have experience knowing my limits." Du-han's eyebrows, which had just relaxed, furrowed tightly again, his gaze becoming more serious, leaving Lac Lam Vien feeling awkward, not knowing where he went wrong. The two grown men standing in the hallway felt a bit out of place, especially since it would soon be peak time for parents to drop off their kids. Lac Lam Vien thought he needed to come up with a new excuse. so he raised the cup and coffee bag in his hand and shook them lightly. Du Tianxin, you go into the class first. You haven't even greeted Miss Dung yet. Oh, she has a lot of teaching experience. I'm sure you'll be satisfied. Duhan didn't engage with that and asked back, have you taken your medicine yet? Lak Lam Vian awkwardly put his hand down and replied, I have. Duhan asked again, when did you take it? Lak Lam Vian's heart warmed slightly. About an hour ago, Duhan coldly replied. After taking the medicine, you shouldn't drink coffee for 2 hours. This was like a splash of cold water on Lak Lam Vian's warming heart, making him feel like Duhan wasn't caring but scolding him for being foolish. Lak Lam Vian quickly stuffed the coffee bag into his pocket, dejectedly saying, then I'll go get some hot water. And then he quickly walked past Duhan, hurrying toward the water room. He wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but he always felt a light tug at his waist, so gentle that he didn't even have time to react. Duhan watched Lak Lam Vian's figure, the man still as foolish as 7 years ago, secretly cursing him fondly. What a fool. As soon as he entered the water room, Lak Lam Vian saw several teachers gossiping about Duhan. Tren Tan, being a married woman, expressed colorful sentiments of adulthood, saying that his nose must be strong in that aspect too. Lak Lam Vian pulled down his mask to drink water, and upon hearing that, he choked and coughed continuously. Tae Vun couldn't help but laugh at his struggling appearance. Miss Tren, what did you say to make our principal so embarrassed? Yeah, someone chimed in. I think our principal is the most handsome. Lak Lam Vian quickly grabbed a tissue to wipe his mouth, his face turning bright red. There are only kids here. Can we watch our words a bit? Trenthan laughed. This is a place only for teachers. Everyone here is an adult, don't be too strict. Our little Vian here in the US is very reserved, never dates girls, and the women exchanged glances and burst into giggles. You don't need to guess. It's clear those ellipses contain some hidden meanings. Maybe Lak Lam Vian is still a virgin. He thought to himself, sorry, but that's really not true. My first time was with Du Tianxin, and he's very strong in that aspect too. It wasn't until the class bell rang that Lak Lam Vian peeked half his body out of the water room, looking down the hallway to find no one there. Passing by Miss Duong's class, Lak Lam Vian glanced through the window, just in time to see the parents interacting with their kids. He saw Duhan gently bowing his head, his finger pointing at the page, saying something to Du Uyen. Du Uyen tilted her head, the pen in her hand lightly poking a small dent into the paper, then she lifted her head to talk. Lak Lam Vian stood outside the class watching. He gently pointed at the paper, saying something to Du Uyen. Du Uyen tilted her head, the pen in her hand lightly poking a small dent into the paper, then looked up to talk again. Lak Lam Vian stood outside the class, watching. A small indentation on the paper, then he looked up to speak. Lak Lam Vian stood outside the class watching, and was also smiling absent-mindedly, when suddenly, Duhan seemed to have a sixth sense and looked up out the classroom door, startling him. He quickly stepped back, pulled up his mask, and hurried back to the office. Once inside, he didn't have any thoughts left about feelings, as Lam Vian buried his head in work, not letting his heart flutter. When he got so busy that the world spun around him, he looked up and it was already 10 o'clock. He rushed out of the office, and the teachers had already started cleaning up on their own. Lam Vian was stunned. It turned out class was over, and all the parents had left. He felt a bit down, turning his sadness into motivation to help clean up. Just then, someone walked up from the end of the hallway, and Duhan slowly said he seemed to have forgotten his watch in the classroom. Teo Hung knew he wore a designer watch and planned to call all the teachers to help look for it. But Duhan said losing the watch was his fault, and the teachers didn't need to help him find it. They should just continue with their work, as he didn't want to delay everyone's time going home. Lam Vian didn't hesitate at all, immediately saying everyone should do their work, and he would go with Duhan to look for it. The two searched for quite a while, and it wasn't until there was only the two of them left in the school that Lam Vian finally heard Duhan say he found it. He was overjoyed, asking where it was. Duhan held the watch in his hand, which still had a bit of dirt on it. It turned out he found it in the flower pot in the classroom, probably dropped there while sketching. Lam Vian felt the place where the watch was lost was truly strange, but he didn't feel it was appropriate to question it. After all, as long as it wasn't lost, that was what mattered. Duhan, of course, wouldn't tell him that the watch was never really lost. He had purposely dropped it just to have an excuse to take him home. Lam Vian refused, telling him to go ahead. But Duhan wasn't about to give up, asking how the director Lam planned to go home. By car? Lam Vian hesitated, reluctantly agreeing with a yes. Really? Where was the director Lam's car parked? When I parked, I didn't see any other cars. Lam Vian felt so embarrassed he wanted to die. Unable to hold back, he admitted to Duhan that he didn't have a car and would take a taxi home later. I still have a bit of money, just a little short. Du-han seemed to have finally hooked a fish after letting out a long line. His tone was so casual, it wasn't safe at all. "I'll take you home, Director Lam, get in the car." After sitting in the car, the awkward and silent atmosphere spread between them. Lam Vian considered himself a chill person, but he wasn't comfortable enough to sit in such a closed space with an ex he hadn't seen in years and still feel at ease. Moreover, they had just met, again not even 2 days ago, and they hardly knew anything about each other. After a long while, Lam Vian finally forced out the first sentence to break the awkwardness. "Your car is nice." Du-han turned on the music, responding with a simple "okay." Lam Vian had no more words to say, just letting the music flow quietly in the car. The car was filled with Du-han's scent, slowly enveloping him. The feelings he thought he had loved to the core back then, he still found hard to forget, but he didn't dare to guess if the other felt the same. Maybe it was no longer the same. If it were, Du Uyen wouldn't exist. From the moment he chose to break up, he and Du-han, is there any other way? Lam Vian felt so embarrassed he could die. Unable to hold back, he told Du-han, "I don't have a car, I'll just take a taxi home later. I still have a bit of money, just a little short." Du-han seemed to have finally hooked a fish after letting out a long line. His tone was so casual, it felt unsafe. "I'll take you home, Principal Lack. Get in the car." After sitting in the car, the awkward and silent atmosphere spread between them. Lam Vian considered himself a chill person, but he wasn't comfortable enough to sit in such a confined space with an ex he hadn't seen in years and still feel at ease. Besides, they had just met again not even 2 days ago, knowing almost nothing about each other. It's like casting a really long fishing line, and finally, a fish is caught. That relaxed tone isn't safe at all. "I'll take you home." Director Lack got in the car. Once they were in the car, an awkward and silent atmosphere spread between them. Lam Vian considered himself to be easygoing, but he wasn't comfortable enough to sit in such a confined space with an ex he hadn't seen in years and still feel at ease. Besides, they had just met. Being able to sit in such a private space with an ex who has been apart for many years and still feel so relaxed, especially since they just met. After a long while, Lam Vian finally mustered up the courage to say the first thing to break the tension. "Your car is nice." Du-han turned on the music, only replying with a casual thanks. Lam Vian had nothing else to say, letting the music flow quietly in the car. The car was filled with the scent of Du-han, slowly enveloping him. The feelings he thought he had long since buried, that he had loved so deeply, were still hard to forget, but he didn't dare to guess if the other person felt the same. Perhaps things had changed. If not, Du-wen wouldn't exist. From the moment he chose to break up, it was him and Du-han. The car was filled with the scent of Du-han, slowly enveloping him. The feelings he thought he had loved with all his heart back then were still hard to forget, but he didn't dare to guess if the other felt the same. Maybe it's not the same anymore. If it were, then there wouldn't be a Du Uyen. From the moment he chose to break up, it was over between him and Du-han.